Hi Alexis, Amy here. I just wanted to explain to you a few things that I wanted you to focus on when you're rewriting your summary essay for grading. Um, I don't think at this point it would be a passing essay, which is why I'm going to have you rewrite it. But hopefully the comments will kind of make sense. And if they don't, just let me know. I just thought a video would be the best way to make it make sense and explain it to you. So one thing I just want to point out quickly is that the version that you uploaded to the Dropbox originally still has the comments from your reviewer, and that is definitely not something you want your teacher to see while they're grading your paper. These are the comments that you should have assimilated into your revisions, and so looking at this, I'm kind of questioning how much you actually revised based on the feedback you received. So, I'm not even sure you've really made these changes, so make sure that you make the changes that your reviewer suggested, and then I will show you my suggestions as well. And I did take these comments off of the version that I marked up, but I just wanted to point them out to you here because you do not want your teacher to see this when you upload to the Dropbox. So here's the version that I commented on, and I'll send you a copy of this as well so that you have a hard copy of all my comments. You do have to click on them to make the whole thing show up, just so you know, because some of these are going to look like sentence fragments, but the rest of the comments there if you just click on it. Okay, so let's start with your formatting. First of all, the whole thing needs to be Times New Roman 12-point font, double spaced, including this information up here at the top. There's a lot of places in the essay where your fonts switch, and I'm afraid that might have to do with copy and pasting. Like I'm suspecting that here for this quote, you copy and pasted that due to the font shift that I'm seeing from here to here, and that's actually a really big red flag when it comes to plagiarism. And so you don't ever want to copy and paste anything. Even if you're taking it word for word, you need to type it out on your own. And then just in terms of how the whole thing looks, make sure that you are doing Times New Roman 12-point font throughout. Your header also needs to be different, so this is not the information that should go in your header. You actually just do the page number at the top of the page all the way to the right, so the third option there, and then your last name, and that's how you do the header. And then your title is way too long as well. Just something like Summary of Stephen Johnson would be plenty, or Summary of quote-unquote web privacy. Your name is up here in the top left corner, so you don't need to include it down here. This information should be in the first sentence of the first paragraph, so you don't need it here. If you're going to include the article title as part of your title, it needs to go in quotes because this is not your title. This is the title of the article, and your summary is something different. And then if any of this language that you're using for your title does come directly from the article, then it needs to be in quotes, just the way you would put quotes around something if it was in the body of the summary. So really, I would just cut out most of this and just give it a much more condensed, concise title that is much shorter, something just like Summary of Web Privacy or Summary of Johnson, or something just really brief like that. Okay, so now jumping into the body of the essay, there are several things that are going to come up again and again that I'll try to focus on as kind of big picture things, and then there are smaller, more detail-oriented suggestions that I'll make. So one thing that I saw throughout is that you're being very evaluative and violating that rule of objectivity in several ways. So in places you evaluate the way he says things. I think you used the word eloquently at one point. You don't want to have any evaluation or discussion or response to how the article is written. You're just focusing on what the author says in the article and restating those things in your own words. So no description of the quality of the work, no evaluation, no response to whether you liked it or not, or if it was good or bad, or anything like that should be in the summary. And also you'll need to avoid using first-person pronouns because I know you're saying things like us, you, we, our in lots of places, and that also violates that objective tone that you really want to achieve when you're writing a summary. So watch out for those things in particular. I also noticed that there's a lot of places where you're focusing on specific evidence instead of main ideas, or if you are focusing on main ideas, you're just a little too vague. You could be more direct in saying exactly what Johnson's points are, and then in a few places you have some quotes that are going on for a little too long, or quotes that aren't executed correctly. So I'm going to touch on all those things, but those are kind of the main areas of concern that I would suggest working on. So in the very first sentence, you need to include the author's name, the title of the article in quotes, the publication date like you have here, and then also the source title where it was published in italics. So in this first sentence you're missing the date and the publication title in italics, so make sure you go back and add those. And then from that introduction you should go right into your paraphrase of the writer's thesis. Overall, what was their main argument in the essay? You don't want to go through the article chronologically because the article may not be written so as to highlight the thesis and main ideas, whereas your summary should be organized to highlight the thesis and main ideas. If you just follow along chronologically with the article, you're going to end up with a summary that's almost just as long as the article. The author might repeat themselves in places, the author might kind of circle back to different points, and you don't need to mimic that with the structure of your summary. You just want to really give the thesis and then go through each point in terms of how important it is related to the thesis, not necessarily how it was organized in the original article, if that makes sense. Really, the whole purpose here is to give proportional coverage to all of his main ideas, and so if something is a really, really major point, you want to make sure to highlight that in the forefront of your summary regardless of where it showed up in the actual article. So you would go author title, or yes, author's name, sorry, article title, publication date, source title in italics, and then jump right into the thesis. This right here is an example of specific evidence that shouldn't be included in the summary at all. You should never include any factual examples or instances of evidence from the article in your summary because, again, it's not going to be concise. If you include all the evidence, it's just going to end up being as long as the original. So anywhere that I see evidence, I would encourage you to instead focus on what is the point that the writer is trying to prove with the evidence and how can you sum that up in your own words, as opposed to giving us the factual evidence itself. So I would cut this out in general because it's too specific, but also because it's interrupting the momentum of your summary in terms of getting right into the thesis. This here is definitely the topic of his discussion, and it is, you know, the general concept or issue that he's addressing with his argument, but it's not the same as his argument itself because his argument would be more like his position on this issue. So he does say that the vast intersections of social interaction online are very complex and affect what we think of as internet privacy today, but does he think this is a good or bad thing? What exactly is his position? Because to prove to me that you really understood this article, you're going to have to be able to show that he actually is in favor of sharing information online. Think, you know, web privacy and praise of oversharing. That's the title, so that's a clue right there. But also why he thinks it's a good thing to share information online, and then what he says are kind of some of the caveats or things that people need to watch out for when they're being careful to do it responsibly. So those are kind of the main ideas that you want to cover throughout your summary. First of all, it's a good thing. Then why he says it's a good thing, and then thirdly, how he says we can all kind of make it safe and responsible, or do it safely and responsibly, each of us for ourselves. So this is the first instance where I felt like, okay, maybe she's being a little bit too evaluative or responding a little bit to how the article is written, just not what, or excuse me, not just what it says. So he dives into deep angles and many perspectives ranging from our new online profile. So this language, into deep angles and many perspectives, I mean, that's true. You could say that's just summary, but again, I think it's kind of borderline because it almost suggests that you are trying to say that it's, you know, well written or well rounded, at least, because he's looking at it from different perspectives. And then of course you have a first person pronoun here, which again violates that objective tone. So don't tell us anything about how it's written or the quality of the writing, just what he says. So he does talk about putting our lives online. Some of the wording here is a little strange. I would just try to be more straightforward. Oversharing and internet intimacy. His perspective on web privacy swirls around with undefined lines of the internet universe that Steve calls the valley. This is an extremely confusing sentence to someone who hasn't read the article. First of all, this part right here is very vague. All swirls around with undefined lines of the internet universe. You know, what I said in my comment here, why can't I get this to show up? Okay. What exactly is his argument? It's not just about the internet in general. What are the exact reasons why he thinks sharing online is good, and what does he say people need to be careful about? So really, that's what I want to see in this first little short paragraph. Not just he's talking about the internet, he's talking about the internet, he's talking about the internet. I want to see you focus on what Johnson says are the benefits of sharing online, why it's a good thing, and how we have to be careful about it. Those are kind of like the counter arguments in his discussion. Somewhat, I wouldn't call them true counter arguments because I think they're actually part of his position, but they're basically just the drawbacks that he acknowledges, the things people have to watch out for. It's still an important part of his discussion, but it doesn't outweigh the fact that he still thinks sharing online is good. So that's really what you need to represent in this first paragraph overall. And then going back to this sentence here, you say the valley. I think you're referring to the valley of intimate strangers, but just pulling it out as the valley is not really representative of what he's saying. It's almost distorting the quote a little bit by just pulling this one word out of context. But regardless of that, even if you had said the valley of intimate strangers here, I'm not sure that phrase, that wording, would really make sense to someone who hasn't read the article. Just explain to me in your own words what he means by that. What does he mean by the Valley of Intimate Strangers? Well, he's basically saying we're in a situation where we can become intimate with a lot of people we've never met, and that's a good thing because then we're exposed to more experiences that we wouldn't maybe be able to interact with otherwise. So just put that in your own words rather than quoting him here, because this phrasing doesn't necessarily make sense unless you read like the whole paragraph from the article around it to know what it means. And then here again is just another example of where you're not being objective, saying eloquently. That's evaluating the quality of his writing, not just presenting what he says. And then you say Steve here, Steve Johnson. He doesn't go by Steve. His name is Stephen. And then in general, though, after the first time, you just want to refer to the author by the last name, so just Johnson is fine. All right, indent the first line of each new paragraph. This is another statement that's borderline responsive, so it bounces around many different views, very similar to what you've said up here about diving into deep angles and many perspectives. Keeps you jumping from side to side. Again, this is kind of more about how it's written than what he says. This is violating objectivity and shouldn't be in summary at all. And then second person pronoun you is really not appropriate in academic writing whatsoever. And then this is exactly where I'm like, maybe this writer doesn't really understand the article because actually his position is way more in favor of the prose with just a little bit of the cons, not necessarily jumping back and forth. The prose definitely get more emphasis in his argument, and you can look at the title for another clue of that. And then again, it seems like you're copying and pasting here because the fonts are kind of jumping around. So in order to ethically incorporate quotes into your writing, make sure that you type them out on your own. He does say that going public can be a civic good. This is what I'm talking about when I say just paraphrase the reasons why he thinks sharing online is a good thing in your own words. So this is a good example of what I'm looking for and what you should be doing more of. Saying this is important here is still evaluating and adding your own perspective or your own opinion on the writing. That shouldn't be in there. Just remain objective instead. And then some of this, I wasn't really sure if these were your ideas or Johnson's because there's not enough attributive tags. And asking a question like this doesn't really say what he is saying in the article. It's kind of requiring the reader to answer the question and fill in the gaps themselves, and that's not your goal as a writer of summary. In writing a summary, you want to tell me what he says, and again, kind of avoid these first-person pronouns, refer to him by the last name. You know, just say exactly here, how much of someone else's personal life does Johnson say people want to know? Yes, some of us do, but is that your opinion or his? What does Johnson say? Johnson says that in fact most people are actually happy to hear about the minutia of everybody's day-to-day lives because that's what makes us connected as humans. It's kind of like small talk, he suggests. So things like that, just putting these in your own words is going to make the summary a lot more indicative of your understanding of the article. This quote is way too long for a concise summary, so it needs to be put in your own words and condensed through paraphrase. And also here and here, these are not real author tags. You can't just put a dash and then the author's name in your own writing. You need to actually use a true attributive tag with a verb like says Johnson and then move the period to the end of the sentence and use a comma to separate the author tag from the quote. More first person pronouns here. We're not able to protect ourselves from being overexposed. That's true, but how does he say we can do that ethically? And that's really the whole point of the article. And then here again, saying it's beneficial is evaluative.